one of the chapters in my book is called The Myth of Male Vulnerability. And it seems to be one of the chapters that has resonated with so many men because it really talks about the quagmire that a lot of men feel, which is when they listen to, therapeutic content that's out there, when they listen to the therapeutic industry, or they turn on the news, or, whatever it is, and people are talking about the challenges that men are facing, the almost inevitable solution is that men need to be more vulnerable. And so a lot of men hear this and they think, okay, I need to be more vulnerable. My wife or my girlfriend, she's telling me to open up. Of course, we're talking about heteronormative relationships, but it sort of applies to any style of relationship. But they're being told to open up and be more vulnerable. And so they think, okay, well, I'll just do that. I'll give it a try. And so they start to bring their emotions, their grief, their anger, their sadness into their relationship with their partner. But it's raw. They haven't actually worked with it in any way. They haven't sculpted it. They haven't, been around other men who have a certain depth and level of emotional capacity and language and ability to work with their own emotions. And so what ends up happening is a lot of guys just bring these sort of raw, unfiltered, unprocessed, misunderstood internal emotions into their relationship, and they sort of emotionally vomit into the relationship at their partner. Maybe that's not the best way of putting it, but it's what we did. It's what I did, right? In the beginning, I was like, okay, women want me to be more vulnerable. And I would just bring all my, all my emotions into the relationship. And then a woman's like, oh, okay, so now I have to help you sort this out. I either have to help you fix this or solve this or do something with this. And what men are really wanting to move towards, and what a lot of women are really saying when they're saying, I want, you to be more vulnerable, is I want you to tell me how you're feeling while also communicating that you've got it in some capacity, that you either have good men in your life that you're working through this with, or that there's something very specific that I can be in service of to you. And what most of us do as guys is, because we're not used to this, we're not used to bringing our emotions to our partner, is that we just put them out there, And you're like, well, I feel really sad about what's happening with my dad, and and it's not processed. There's no real context. There's no direction. There's nothing. And so, but which can feel very unsafe for a partner. Right?
I was just going to say, I'm glad you said that. It's unsafe. Yeah.
But what is safe, and what is attractive, and what does create intimacy and polarity, is when we as men can understand and have the level of self-awareness to tune into, I feel a certain, I'm experiencing a certain charge around this conversation, the charge of anger, or the charge of embarrassment, or the charge of shame, and to be able to have the tools to work with that, to acknowledge it, to not let it take hold of us, to not suppress it. Because what most of us as guys do is we either move to suppress it, right? I feel angry and I shouldn't feel that way. Let me stuff that shit down. Or we become it. We literally act from that emotion. And, we blow up, we let our anger out, whatever it is. So one of the best things that I always try and tell men is, like, practice your emotional communication with other men in your life. Have conversations about where you're struggling, about what you're dealing with in your marriage or relationship or your career or your health or with your family, because that becomes the kind of training ground for you to expand your internal sense of self-awareness, but also have a wider tool set, so that when you go to your partner and you say, hey, I've been feeling this way about our sex life, or I've been feeling this way about my relationship with my dad, or, how our kid is struggling, that you are much more grounded in it. You're not just bringing this, like, raw emotion that you just tuned into for the very first time, unfiltered, sort of not worked with, to your partner, and putting it on them to figure out what to do with it. Because the biggest challenge that I see happening, and I'll pause here, the biggest challenge that I see happening in a lot of modern day relationships is that a man unconsciously turns his partner into his emotional processing center.
Yes.
Right. So he feels something, and then he creates conflict with her to try and get her to figure out what he's feeling or how he should deal with it or what he should do because of it. Right. And that's taxing on the relationship. And I think it creates a lot of impatience with his feminine partner, if, that's the dynamic. And I think it disempowers him because he wants to feel emotionally competent, right? He wants to feel intellectually competent, financially competent with his body. And so what we need to do is practice developing a certain level of competence and confidence in being able to speak some of these things. So,
well, and what you said too, not only does he put that on her and expect her to kind of fix it, it's like what I've seen, I mean, personally, but also in my clients, is there's this unspoken, unconscious desire for her to fix it too, right? And so you put somebody in this kind of mother-son dynamic. And I hear so often in my couples where, they'll say, well, she mothers me or she nags me or she this or she that. And when I get down to it, there's a lot of this happening that you're saying. And so I'm like, well, but here's the thing. Both parties have to take responsibility here because you continue to put her in the motherhood role. That's not just her. She's not just swooping in and doing that without you continually saying, please take the wheel for me. Please take the wheel for me, right? You're both kind of complicit in this. And I think that's really important for a lot of my male clients to hear is what their role is when they get into the mothering dynamic.
Yeah, and I want to make it clear to all the guys that are listening to this. I'm not saying you're responsible for this and you're a fault or anything like that. But what I am saying is, we all have I've been working with men for a decade, and I've worked with tens of thousands of guys from around the world, and I have learned time and time again that every man has a certain vision of who he wants to be in the relationship. And who he wants to be as a man, who he wants to be as a father and a husband and a leader. Like, we all have a certain internal sense and pull towards who we want to be. And a lot of conflict shows up in a relationship when a man is not living in congruency with who he ultimately wants to be. And so a lot of the times this is solved by questioning guys and saying, what I'll usually do is who are you actually wanting to be in the relationship, and who are you being right now? Because a lot of the times it's well, I'm being needy and I'm being insecure and I'm, passing off decisions that I know I want to be making. And, all of a sudden this huge list starts to unfold. And it's okay, well, who are you wanting to be in the relationship? And, one of the things that I wrote about is we as men are very externalized. And so we look out at our partners and we think, I have to figure her out. I have to figure out what she needs and what she wants. And I have to figure out how to make her happy. And if I can do all of those things, if I can figure her out and figure out how to make her happy, then maybe I'll get my needs met in return, right? This is I hate this saying, it's the epitome of happy life, happy wife, happy life, right?
Yeah,
if I can just make
we're all
happy,
a lot.
then maybe I can get my needs met in return. And, and then there's another group of guys that are well, I don't give a shit about that at all. And so the pendulum is a little bit in the opposite direction. But what we have to start to do is to turn our focus or sort of spotlight of consciousness in the relationship away from our partner. How do I figure her out? How do I make her happy? How do I, all the sort of questions that most of us guys are rationally grappling with in our head, and turn it back towards ourselves and say, who am I being in the relationship? How am I showing up? Am I being reactive? Am I shutting down and it's sort of making excuses or reasons for that? Am I shutting down and disconnecting for days at a time from my partner? Am I blowing up and becoming angry and reactive and justifying that? Am I not asking for what I want? Am I not making certain decisions? And so when we can begin to do that, then we have hope that we can start to step into the type of self-leadership and self-authorship that a lot of men are deeply craving. And this is, in many ways, what I'm describing is a stepping towards and stepping into and the embodying of our masculine essence, that we take a not responsibility, but we take a call to adventure, a call to on the journey of who could I be and become. Because one of the things that I love about Carl Jung is he said, the fastest racehorse, or the fastest horse in the race of individuation is marriage, right? Or relationships. Because, and the other thing he said is that women stand right at the very edge of where a man's shadow begins. So what does all that mean? All that is a very complicated psychological way of saying that women are going to ignite your insecurities, your inferiorities, your fears, your doubts, and vice versa, right? You, when you're standing in your own truth and your own power and you're very clear on what you want, are going to ignite their fears and their insecurities and their inferiorities. And so we have to do the work to turn the lens back onto ourselves rather than trying to change their behavior, because we can't control that.